Well, good morning, Angus Kidman. There you are. Now, you're in Sydney, I presume, are you?
I am indeed.
Good. Well, I'm on the Sunshine Coast, but there's a spot of misrepresentation there this morning because it's cloudy. So I think in the current environment, I think there'll be people suing the Sunshine Coast Council because it's cloudy. But Angus, now you're with Finder.com, and your specialty as an organization is helping consumers find the best deals, isn't it?
It is indeed. And yeah, we're always trying to actively encourage people to do that. Of course, that's been challenging in travel in the last year, where it's not just about finding the best deal. Sometimes it's about, I found a great deal, but now my trip's not happening and I can't get into it. That's been a real issue for consumers in the last year.
It's terribly frustrating at the moment. But the purpose of our talk really is because I know that you've done some interviews and stuff on Sunrise and stuff like that about the choice review that's just out, or report that's just out now, about people who are losing their deposits and their payments and everything to airlines, cruise companies, travel agencies. There's a lot of confusion out there. So for an organization like you, which is in the business of solving travel issues and getting people the best deals, the other end of it now is they've paid their money, now they can't get it back. So what's going on in this space, and what have Choice been saying?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting, messy time. So ever since the pandemic, people have had these issues where they've wanted to get refund. They haven't gone on a trip. From a consumer point of view, it seems really simple. I pay for this thing, you haven't provided it, I should get my money back. That's how the consumer thinks about it. But that has not been the reality for many consumers, where they've had the problem of, businesses have said, oh no, we're not prepared to offer a refund. We'll potentially give you a credit for something in the future, but our terms and conditions say we don't have to give you a refund, so we don't want to. The terms and conditions vary hugely across different types of things. So the conditions for cruises are often different for the conditions for flights, which are different to conditions of hotels, even though in your head, that's all one holiday. That's, as a consumer, you're just thinking that's this thing I paid for, but there's actually these different rules. So there's been a lot of confusion over this, and the reality is that in most cases under current consumer law, it does come back to, well, what the terms and conditions say when you signed up for that thing that's going to dictate how you get a refund. And so what the Choice report has really tried to highlight is to say, could we have more consistent regulation? Could we actually have a more clearly defined right to giving people refunds in these circumstances and not make it so dependent on that? I think it's a really worthy goal. We should have better legislation around this. But the reality is, getting consumer legislation to change takes a long time. Like a campaign like this is just the start of it. And it would be great to have better certainty in the future. But the reality is, no legislation that's introduced now is going to change what's happened to the people who are currently in this position. And that's what I think is important. At the moment, it's still a case of, if you're there trying to get that refund, trying to work out how you can use a credit potentially, you're still very much on your own. And it's hard to imagine that any legislation would actually deal retrospectively with things, because legislation doesn't work like that. So, I think it's really important that the issue is there, but we are now in the phase of going, you've still got to go, well, it's not going to help me if right now I'm still sitting here trying to work out how I'm going to get my refund.
But the most amazing thing about this is, you take a pack of sausages back to supermarkets or whatever, because they're not sausages you booked, and the supermarket or whatever will go, oh my gosh, I'm so worried about this because, I want to retain you as a client. Wow, wouldn't that be interesting? Okay, so I'm going to give you a refund or a new pack of sausages or whatever. Isn't the travel industry shooting itself in its foot, in a sense, by, we're talking about airlines, cruise companies, tour operators, travel agency groups, everybody saying, no, you're not getting your money back. We're going to hold it until we tell you you can cruise or fly or whatever. And for many people, that won't happen, because a lot of travelers are older travelers. But isn't it damaging their brands in terms of, not being generous to these clients?
Yes, and I think that there is a real risk of that, like, if you don't go in and do the right thing, then people are going to remember that and they're going to go, right, well, I'm not going to do that kind of travel, or perhaps I'm not going to do that kind of travel with you. People already have very strong biases in this area. There are lots of people who say, oh, I'll never fly Qantas again. Lots of people say, oh, I'll never fly Virgin again. People are already habituated to do that sort of stuff. So there is a real risk that those businesses are going, oh no, we're just trying to, we don't want to have to hand over those refunds. That's going to be problematic. And you're seeing a balancing act with some of those. So the airlines did they went out of their way to make it easier for you to get a credit and to keep using it. So they kept extending the credits. Our initial batch of credits that came out all sort of only ran till the end of 2020. Now they're kind of into 2022, 2023. So I think that's where, they're trying to make that effort to say, okay, we're not going to try and force you to use this in a hurry. We recognise it's going to take a while. So some airlines have gone down that route, but a lot of brands haven't, and some of them perhaps feel like they're just not in a position to do so. But yeah, there really is that risk that ultimately you're possibly burning off a future customer because you're saying, oh, well, we're making it difficult here. And people do have choices in these areas, like maybe not so in Australia, not so much when it comes to airlines. It's a fairly limited market. But you can see in that cruising space, the likely outcome, we know all the data tells us people who enjoy cruising really like cruising, like the cruising becomes as important as the destinations they go to. There's a real chance that, so you're not necessarily going to turn people off cruising long term, but you might turn them off using your brand. And I think that's a real risk. But I think any brand that's like flat out refusing to do it or making it really difficult, it becomes a real challenge for them. It's a reputational challenge. And there's the snowball effect that it's not just that customer you're affecting. There are all the other people they're going to complain to on Facebook and everywhere else and say, I will never use so-and-so again. I've had this terrible experience. So I think there's a balancing act for the industry where it has to go, it's challenging. It's like, obviously there's been no revenue. These are very tough times to be trying to run any kind of travel, but it's, you've got to think about what's the long-term that we're coming out with.
That's right. But there is legislation in other countries. In the UK, I don't think it's such a big deal. I think there's legislation in the UK under the ATOL, Air Transport Operational License or whatever. And I think in the US as well, DOT or something is it called? I can't remember what it's called now, where people have been receiving refunds. So why is it so different in Australia? And for example, in the past, were people able to receive refunds from some previous legislation? Are you aware of that?
So it's noticeably better in the UK, but of course I think part of that comes from that came up from effectively a range of failed package tour companies where people lost a lot of money, and they said, right, we have to. So in fact, they had to have the problem before they decided to introduce the solution. I think one of the challenges in Australia, particularly, the reason why here it has been messy is because consumer law is national, but the implementation is at state level. And this sounds familiar because this is what we've been hearing about everything to do with the pandemic, that there's a conflict there in how it works. And that's no different. So there is a general kind of tendency in Australia to go, look, we have regulation, but it's light touch, and we will try and rely on the industry to have its own codes of practice to do the right thing here. And I think we've kind of pushed up against the limits of how well that works with the pandemic. It's just like it's a point where you can go, and they will turn around and say, no, our conditions are clear about what will happen here. And they do work in some respects. If your flight gets outright cancelled, in most cases now, you will get that refund. Like the refund is an option that is on the table for you because you literally couldn't fly. So in that aspect of it, actually works reasonably well. If the flight literally doesn't happen, you've got the option if you want to. So say, I'll take a credit if I prefer. If the flight hasn't yet been cancelled, they've got flexible about that. If they absolutely haven't been able to deliver the service, then that's meaning, okay, where it's got complicated is because in many cases, obviously, international cruises, those haven't been delivered. They're not necessarily Australia-based companies. They are selling in Australia, so they are subject to Australian consumer law. You don't get out of that by being based in sort of anywhere. But the reality of how to follow it up, this is really where there's no good way to intervene. If the only thing you can do is wait on hold for 24 hours, hoping someone's going to answer the phone, there's nothing in the current legislation that protects against that. And certainly that's one of the things the Choice Report highlights, and one of the things I think there need to be clearer methods of redress when you feel like you're getting nowhere, because these are the stories you hear. People are like, I can't get in touch with this company. All they've given me is an email address they never answer, or a phone number that just rings out, or I'm just on hold for 24 hours and nothing happens. That's clearly an area where the rights are probably established. The way that you get access to those things isn't clear. And possibly you do need that ATOL style kind of scheme of saying, oh, look, everyone's actually paying a little bit into this and that would help do a refund. But realistically, it's again, the horse has bolted. This might be a lesson that we've learned for the next time there's going to be this kind of problem. It's not going to help with the current ones at the moment, I don't think.
I think the whole issue of trust funds as well and how they work and all that sort of stuff is important. But there's a lot of people very frustrated in Australia at the moment. I mean, I'm aware of somebody with a cruise company that paid $40,000 to a cruise company and can't get it back. And I mean, he says quite clearly, I will never ever cruise with this company again. It's as simple as that. Just in terms of the sectors, right? You've had a lot of feedback from different people and spoken to people in the industry. Which sectors have been particularly dilatory or bad at refunding money? And in a sense, coming from the corporate world, I understand why these companies don't want to give the money back, because of course they want to hold on to it, because they need the cash because they're not operating. If you look at the loss for Carnival and Royal Caribbean and in the cruising space, you know, massive losses. So I mean, if they can hold on to money, they're going to hold on to it. But which sectors have been particularly rocky in this space?
So I think we've already highlighted. I think cruises has been very problematic. Like those are big money investments for people. You're often talking $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for a more higher end cruise going over a few days. So I think in that space, there's been a lot of reluctance on the part of those companies to refund things, and they will point to terms and conditions and say, "Oh no, if we can't do this, we can optionally move you to other." Like they'll pull out all the bells and whistles to stop. I think that's been problematic. At the other end, a lot of the accounts I've got come from the absolute smaller scale version of it. People who are looking at accommodation through Airbnb and services like that, because in those cases, the policy can actually be set by the host. Like, say, different people have different conditions applied there. And I've lots of accounts of people saying, I've had terrible trouble being able to get a refund, even when it's clear that I can't get to that country and do this kind of thing. The communication can be slow because you haven't got a central body to talk to. So there's been a lot of issues there, and that also speaks to the fact that that's not a fully professionalized sector. Like, there is a huge variability. There are people, making their entire living out of running Airbnb hosting, and there are people who are just casually renting a room in their house. And I convert some of the conversations I've had with people, it's probably the people who are more professional about it, the more difficult. I think in some ways, if you're renting a room in your house, your empathy is higher, and you can go, of course you couldn't get here. That's all right. I understand, and maybe it'll happen. So I think those sectors have been difficult. And again, generally with accommodation, there's been, even within the domestic space, people started traveling again. They said, I've got a good deal. They booked this. They didn't realize that the cheap deal they booked for the hotel wasn't the cancelable one. So I think that's been the thing. I have seen, looks to me that the hotel sector's responded to that a bit. And in a lot of cases now, the only rate they're trying to offer is the flexible rate. They've realized they're better off just quoting that higher rate and giving people something that can be done, and I think that's a smart move. That's like getting ahead of the problem and saying, let's not do that discounted rate that you can't cancel, because if there's some kind of lockdown, it's going to come back and bite us. So I think there's probably room for more of that thinking of saying, let's make sure we're not trying to sell the things that it's harder to get a refund on, because at the moment it's very hard to predict when that might happen.
It's going to cause us more problems. I mean, just talking about the airlines quickly before we close off, have the airlines been pretty good? I mean, I do know somebody who spent $25,000 with Virgin Australia without wanting to highlight them particularly. But it was on international flights. And of course, the whole complication around the Virgin Australia administration and the purchase by Bain Capital and all that sort of stuff meant that, they were generously given credits, but Virgin Australia doesn't fly anymore internationally. So as this person said to me, well, where the hell am I going to spend $25,000 on domestic flights with Virgin? I mean, that was one example. But of the airlines being good generally,
I think on the whole, the airlines haven't been too bad, because even the credit option they were fast to leap on, particularly in Australia with our major airlines. That is what happened. They were quite willing to do that. And they certainly have. They've taken that path of saying, we are making things more flexible. They've taken out change fees when you've got to do date changes that they used to previously have. So I think the airline sector has done all right. I think absolutely right. Virgin, it was tough because there was that phase where it wasn't clear whether they were going to be operating at all. Post the buyout, they've actually got much faster. I've had this experience myself getting refunds that, like, when things have been cancelled. Prior to that, it was taking a week, 2 weeks for them to respond. Now you go on an online form, they get it done within 6 hours. So I think the airlines have picked up on that front, and I'm hoping that maybe there is a lesson for them there, that they need to be clearer about what's included and make changes. Even Jetstar's done quite well with that, with their option now that you can pay what amounts to an extra $20 to make your fee fully cancelable. You're not going to do that for $30 fare, but if you're spending, if you're going over to New Zealand, it's probably a worthwhile investment to spend that money just in case it goes wrong.
Look, I think there are a lot of lessons out there, and I think that's part of the key to this, in a sense. I mean, for those people who are hanging out there and trying to get their money back and arguing and fighting and getting nowhere, I mean, there are various people, and I'm going to be interviewing somebody who's been involved as an advocate in that space and with some great success, Adam Glazer, later today. But I think the choice report coming out, I mean, easier travel refunds, which the airlines and lots of these companies surely are going to be looking at that now. Minimum voucher credit rights, mandatory industry code for airlines and large travel providers, it's got to happen. A travel and tourism industry ombudsman, because there was nowhere for people to go to sort of say, right, okay, this is my issue, can you help me? Mandatory information standard at time of booking, absolutely. And I think the other one is not changing the terms and conditions as things go along, you know, which they have been doing. What about the ACCC market study into the travel and tourism sector? What do you think? What's your view on that?
Look, I think, yeah, it's always good to get the ACCC involved in these things because that means that it's starting to come into people's radar. But it's honestly, they're slow processes. They get the data, they make some recommendations. Maybe there's never anything binding much about what the ACCC comes up with. So my concern always with that is like, can we actually get it to happen? On the other hand, yeah, I'm mindful that one of the successes for the ACCC in this area was making it mandatory to be really clear about what a fare includes and that you've got to include all the booking fees and stuff. Yes. We have that in Australia. Lots of markets still don't have that. So you'll get quoted some ridiculously low fee and then it's higher. So I think that demonstrates that it can be done. You can set regulation. And of all those things, I do think, having an ombudsman there would really help because I think it's when things get thorny, having someone who can get involved. That's worked really very well in the telecommunications sector with the TIO in Australia. Yes. So we have a model for that. We have something that we could emulate. And I think if we start going down that path, that's one of the outcomes I'd like to see at the end of all the ACCC research and at the end of this experience, and that the Choice Report highlights that we need to give people better access to resources for when this goes wrong, because you probably can't regulate to stop all of the things going wrong, but you can make it easier to deal with the situations when they do arise.
So just in closing, what's your advice to those people now who, in the past now, who booked their holidays, booked their flights, booked their cruises or whatever, and are still not getting refunds? What's your advice to them? Is tenacity the name of the game?
Tenacity is very key. You have to keep going on these things. If you're still going on these discussions, if you haven't done it, do get your state-based consumer affairs involved. Let them know that you've been trying to do this. The other key, obvious, is you have to document everything. Like write down when you start the phone call, note when you've done it, note when they answer, note down everything they say. Like make sure you've got clear records of all the discussions you've had. Keep that trail. Keep all your documents together. It does take a lot of effort, but you can get there. It's really, in the end, if you're tenacious about it, I think you can succeed in a lot of cases, but it is definitely, it's time consuming. And I suppose the only thing you can say is that, if like me, you're in Sydney, you're during a lockdown, this is something you can fit your time in with. You can sort of work on that, but it definitely, I don't want to be, it's not as easy as it should be. And it would be great if it was easier.
Just a final one just came into my mind now. What about travel agents? Because I mean, we talk a lot about travel agents and having them on your side, and booking through a travel agent means when things go wrong, you've got an advocate on your side. But there've been stories about travel agencies not being too good either, and holding on to money, not passing it on to clients, but getting it from suppliers and so on. Where do the travel agents fit into all this, and where are they going to fit into it in the future? Because so many have gone out of business through COVID.
Yeah, I mean, if you're dealing with a travel agent, then they become your point of contact. Like literally, if you book through a travel agent, your airline, your hotel is going to say, oh, you've got to go and talk to them first. So I think that's and I think the challenge is, what if you book through a travel agent and they're one of the ones who went belly up? Then that's really, really hard. Like that's a genuinely poor situation. Again, an ombudsman would have a role to play in solving that. I think in the future, a good travel agent will be the one who's proactive and knows how to deal with this stuff. And it's almost like they're contacting their clients and saying, we've already seen that your booking's been changed. We're talking to them right now. We're trying to get that done, because a good travel agent can deliver all that. They really can be the force that gets that sorted out. And I think, we know that the future for travel agents is that you do have to be sort of high service and high touch. Like people need to see the value add because they can do the basic booking themselves. And in fact, when things go wrong is one of the ways you can demonstrate that value. So I think, successful travel agents, that's the path they'll go on. So
no, absolutely, you're right. And if there's anything positive to emerge out of this, or there will be lots of positive things, but it's really having a good relationship with your travel agents, because I know so many have been spending months and months and months negotiating refunds for no fee whatsoever. But it's about time, and I've said this for the last 25 years, that travel agents went into the fee-for-service space, so that their consumers get used to them saying, well, actually, yes, I can do that, but it's going to cost $200 or whatever. But look, Angus Kidman, thank you very much for your insights and your time. Very, very helpful, and great to speak to somebody that's so passionate and so knowledgeable about the travel industry in Australia. Angus Kidman from Finder. Is it finder.com.au or finder.com?
Either will do, but finder.com.au is the one people know it because it has a jingle that they sing along with, so that's what sticks in their heads.
Fantastic. Angus, enjoy your jingle.
Will do. Thanks, John.